For months, Iran had taken the Gulf hostage, threatened its neighbors with proxy forces, and held the Strait of Hormuz to ransom. It believed its Arab neighbors were weak and divided. But those neighbors were not as unprepared as assumed. They watched, waited, and struck at the right moment. Now, Iran's Shiite crescent is cracking, and this time, it is not Western powers but its Muslim neighbors who are shattering it. And the most concrete evidence of this cracking came from a Wall Street Journal expose. The operational details that emerged clearly on the reports show just how much Iran underestimated its neighbors, and just how resolutely those neighbors fought back. Let's now look at the details of this operation, because the picture that emerges resembles a planned military operation rather than a neighborly attack. In early April 2026, just after the days when the US-Iran ceasefire was declared, Mirage 2009 fighter jets, belonging to the UAE Air Force, took off and headed for Lavon Island in the Persian Gulf. The target was extremely specific: the refinery facilities of the National Iranian Oil Refining and Distribution Company, NIORDC, on the island. The strike caused a massive fire. A significant portion of the refinery facilities was damaged, and the capacity loss continued for months. The Iranian side characterized it as an enemy attack, but at the time, the identity of who was behind the attack was not disclosed to the public. And here, there is a very critical timing detail. The strike occurred almost simultaneously with the ceasefire declaration. In other words, while the US and Israel were officially stopping fire, the UAE was launching its own covert air campaign. While peace was being discussed at the ceasefire table, Mirage jets were dropping bombs on Iranian territory. It appears that Lavon Island was not randomly selected as a target. The island sits approximately 130 kilometers offshore from Iran's main coastline in the middle of the Persian Gulf. The refinery on it is an important link in Iran's southern petroleum exports, and due to its geographic location, it falls outside Iran's mainland air defense umbrella. This means UAE pilots were able to strike a strategic target without having to penetrate Iran's strongest defense lines. The Mirage 2009 was a logical choice for this operation. This French-built fighter jet forms the backbone of the UAE's air forces, equipped with advanced radar and electronic warfare systems, capable of delivering precision-guided munitions and fully compatible with night operations. The UAE has been using these jets for years against Houthi targets in Yemen and in various operations in Libya, meaning the pilots have real combat experience. Some open-source analysts assess that Wing-Lung 2 armed drones may also have been used in the operation. These Chinese-made drones are in the UAE's inventory and were widely used in Yemen. The jet-drone combination may be a reflection of the hybrid air operations doctrine the UAE has developed in recent years. Jets deliver the heavy strike, while drones provide reconnaissance and damage assessment. And perhaps the most striking detail, the US was aware of these attacks. According to WSJ's sources, Washington quietly welcomed them, meaning the Pentagon knew where the Mirages were flying but did not intervene. This tacit approval fully aligns with the US strategy of allies should provide their own regional security. The UAE, throughout this entire period, did not officially acknowledge the attack. Abu Dhabi's statement remained extremely measured. We reserve our right to respond to hostile actions. It neither confirmed nor denied the attack, exactly as written in the diplomatic playbook of covert operations. Iran's response was not covert. Quite the opposite, it was open and devastating. Following the Lavon strike, Iran's Revolutionary Guards launched a comprehensive missile and drone attack on Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Kuwait. According to data compiled by Wikipedia, Iran fired a total of 438 ballistic missiles, 2,012 drones, and 19 cruise missiles at the UAE throughout this war. These figures cover the entire war, not a single Lavon retaliation wave. But the Lavon strike may have been one of the harshest triggers of this retaliation cycle. The targets were strategically selected: airports, ports, and energy facilities. Fujairah Port, the UAE's most important energy export point outside the Strait of Hormuz, became a target of Iranian missiles. Civilian infrastructure in Dubai and Abu Dhabi was also hit. The result? 13 people lost their lives and 224 people were injured. These numbers were shocking for the UAE because the country had not faced a direct military attack since the 2022 Houthi drone strike. And this time, the threat was far larger than the Houthis. It was Iran itself. But the UAE's defense performance is also noteworthy. THAAD and Patriot air defense systems stopped a significant portion of Iranian missiles. The UAE has invested billions of dollars in air defense in recent years, and this investment faced its first real test after Levant. Most ballistic missiles did not reach their targets, but a sufficient number breached the defenses and caused serious damage. And here the ruthless equation of asymmetric warfare emerges. The UAE disabled an Iranian refinery for months with a few Mirage jets. Iran attacked the UAE with hundreds of missiles and drones, but the UAE's air defense shield kept the damage limited. The gap between the attacker's cost and the defender's cost clearly shows the economic dimension of the Gulf War, and this equation may be working in the UAE's favor. Kuwait's presence in this equation is a separate question mark. The fact that Iran's retaliation also encompassed Kuwait shows that tensions in the Gulf have moved far beyond a UAE-Iran bilateral conflict. Kuwait was not a direct party to the war, but Iran's missiles did not care about that. But perhaps the most interesting dimension of this story is not the Levant operation itself, but how the UAE reached this point. Because the United Arab Emirates was a country trying to soften its relations with Iran just a decade ago. Diplomatic channels between Abu Dhabi and Tehran had been opened, commercial ties had strengthened. The UAE relied on UN diplomacy regarding island disputes with Iran, particularly the Greater Tum, Lesser Tum, and Abu Musa Islands. And then everything changed. The 2022 Houthi drone attack fundamentally shook the UAE's security perception. An Iran-backed proxy force in Yemen could reach the heart of Abu Dhabi. In 2023 to 2024, relations with Israel deepened within the framework of the Abraham Accords. Intelligence sharing, defense technology transfer, and joint security plans gained momentum. And when the Iran-US war broke out in 2026, the UAE found itself facing a choice: maintain diplomatic neutrality or become an active player. Abu Dhabi chose the second option, but it did so secretly. Several strategic calculations may lie behind this transformation. First, Iran's threat to UAE energy infrastructure was concrete. Iran had previously targeted UAE tankers and conducted sabotage operations near Fujairah port. The UAE may have decided that a defense is enough strategy was not working, and appears to have adopted the lesson that attack is the best defense. Second, the US pressure for allies to take on more responsibility. The Trump administration's maximum pressure policy is pushing Gulf allies beyond being passive observers. Washington's quiet approval of the Levant strike is the concrete result of this pressure. The US no longer wants to conduct every operation itself and expects its allies to get their hands dirty. Third, and perhaps the most critical, the UAE's goal of regional power projection. Abu Dhabi wants to be recognized not just as a trade and finance center, but as a security actor with military capability. The Yemen operations were the first test of this capacity. The Libya intervention was the second, and the Levant strike was the third. But this time, the target was not a proxy force, but Iran itself. Of course, this transformation is not without risk. The UAE's population is only around 10 million, 90% of which are foreign workers. Its economy is based on tourism, trade, and energy exports. And all these sectors are within Iran's missile range. 13 casualties and 224 injured is an extremely high price by UAE standards. And Iran's retaliation capacity allows for much larger attacks. The UAE may have permanently changed the power balance in the Gulf by taking this risk. The revelation of the UAE's secret war affects the strategic equation in the Gulf on several different levels. First, Iran's deterrence claim took another blow. The Revolutionary Guards had been deterring Gulf states for years with the threat of, "We will destroy you if you attack." The UAE attacked, Iran retaliated, but the UAE is still standing and its air defense shield works. This equation sends a very clear message to other Gulf states, especially Saudi Arabia. The price of taking military action against Iran is high, but bearable. And how Saudi Arabia reads this message is extremely important. Riyadh has been waging proxy wars with Iran for years, in Yemen, Iraq, and Lebanon. But it has never directly struck Iranian territory. The UAE crossing this threshold could encourage Saudi Arabia to take similar steps, especially in an environment where US tacit approval exists. Second, a new risk has emerged for Iran's proxy networks. Iran's regional strategy is to project power through proxies, but now when Iran itself was struck, the proxy's response remained limited. Houthis are preoccupied with their own problems. Hezbollah has been worn down by Israeli attacks, and Iran's direct allies in the Gulf practically non-existent. It was not Iran's proxies, but its own missiles that responded to the UAE's Levant strike. This shows the limits of the proxy network's capacity to protect the patron. Third, the energy security equation is becoming more complex. The UAE reduced Iran's petroleum export capacity by striking its refinery, but Iran's retaliation also targeted the UAE's own energy infrastructure. Fujairah port was damaged by attacks. And all of this occurred during a period when the Strait of Hormuz was already closed due to US blockade and Iranian threats. Global energy markets are pricing these cross-attacks. Brent oil prices spike with each new escalation. The security of 20 million barrels of daily oil passing through Hormuz is now in the shadow of not just the US-Iran, but also the UAE-Iran conflict. Insurance premiums have risen, tanker routes have changed, and every ship passing through the Gulf now sails in a multi-threat environment. Thieves. A deep crack within the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, may be becoming apparent. Qatar and Oman keep dialogue channels with Iran open. Oman already mediated in US-Iran negotiations, but the UAE bombed Iranian territory. These two stances coexist within the same organization, and this contradiction could paralyze the GCC's joint security policy. And fifth, perhaps the longest-term consequence, covert operations poisoning diplomacy. The diplomatic bridges built between the UAE and Iran over years may have been destroyed by the Levant strike. Iran will from now on play the "you struck us even during the ceasefire" card in any negotiation with the UAE. And this distrust could poison not just UAE-Iran, but all Gulf diplomacy. Peace talks are already difficult, and now they need to be conducted in the shadow of secret wars. And Mario Norfal's final question in his tweet is perhaps the most disturbing one. There were more participants in this war than have been announced. Who else do you think was quietly involved? This question hangs in the air, because WSJ's revelation opened the door, and behind that door, there may be other covert operations. The possibility that Saudi Arabia targeted Iranian territory independently of the UAE is being discussed. Riyadh maintained its official position of US ally but not active combatant throughout the war. But the revelation of the UAE's covert attacks calls into question how realistic this position was. Bahrain, the small island state where the US Fifth Fleet is based, and which has deep historical tensions with Iran, may have played a role in intelligence sharing and logistics support. Bahrain's Shia majority population has cultural ties with Iran, but the Sunni government views Iran as an existential threat. And the Israel factor. Whether the UAE benefited from Israeli intelligence or technology in the Levant operation is not yet clear. But it is known that UAE-Israel intelligence sharing has deepened within the Abraham Accords framework. Israel's knowledge of Iran's air defense network may have provided UAE pilots with operational advantage. From target selection to flight routes, Israel's fingerprints are being sought. And there is also a technology dimension to this secret war. The UAE's Mirage jets are French-made, but some of the weapon systems may have been enhanced with Israeli and US technology. The Wingloom 2 drones are Chinese-made, meaning the same China's technology is being used both as Iran's ally and against Iran. This paradox once again questions the moral dimension of global arms trade. The UAE's decision to keep this operation secret is also extremely logical from a strategic standpoint. Openly declaring war would have triggered Iran's right to full-scale retaliation, but the covert operation left Iran in the ambiguity of who struck. Iran knew the attacker, but couldn't prove it, and this ambiguity may have limited the scale of Iran's retaliation. If the UAE had openly said, "Yes, we struck," Iran's response could have been far more severe. This tactic is known in military strategy as a deniable operation. Inflict damage on your enemy, but do not assume official responsibility. Israel has been applying this tactic in Syria for decades. The US uses it in CIA operations, and now the UAE appears to have joined this club. But secrecy has a limit. The WSJ revelation shows that this limit has been crossed. And once revealed, the diplomatic cost of covert operations can be far heavier than open operations. Because now Iran is not just saying, "We were attacked." It can react by saying, "And the world didn't know." This is an argument that will facilitate Iran's search for international sympathy. It appears that the secret war in the Gulf is not just a military matter, it is a diplomatic minefield. Every revelation creates new tensions. Every covert operation erodes trust a little more, and makes peace talks a little more difficult. The Wall Street Journal opened a curtain, and behind it a much wider picture than the official combatants emerged. The UAE, the country that had been building diplomatic bridges with Iran for years, secretly struck Iranian territory with Mirage 2000 jets. The refinery on Lavan Island remained out of service for months, and Iran responded with hundreds of missiles and drones. The US knew and quietly approved. Israel's intelligence share has not yet been clarified, and whether countries like Saudi Arabia and Bahrain had their own covert operations remains a question mark. There were officially two sides in this war, but the real picture is far more complex, and it is far too early to say all the curtains have been opened. The shadow front of the war in the Gulf has come to light, and how many more actors exist in this shadow, the coming months will probably show. So, what do you think about this topic? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for choosing us.